Brant Kuithe is done for the season, but what does that mean for this Utah Utes offense going forward? Also, what does the tape tell us about the Utes in their victory over Arizona State? We're talking about on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone. My name is JT Wistrcill, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We do greatly appreciate it. Today's episode is brought to you by Upside. Download the free Upside app and use promo code LOCK to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. So on today's show, guys, we're going to be going over Brant Kuithe's injury, the fallout of that, what it means for this Utah offense, who's going to step in and replace him, as well as talking about some of the things that the tape told us from the Arizona State game. But do want to start with a very specific thing first that hits close to home for all Utah fans. And in order to do that, I want to bring on friend of the show, Bryan Brown, as well. Bryan, appreciate you joining us as you often do. And today is when we are recording, you guys will hear this on Tuesday, so it will be the day before, but we're recording today on the anniversary of Aaron Lowe's passing. And it's just one of those days that just hits you like, man, it's been a year. There's so much that happens there. And just when I think of Aaron and just what's happened, the push for 22% as well, Ty Jordan as well, I just think about how precious life is, as well as just, I'm reminded as well, just to kind of keep going and push forward. Like the motto of 22% get better each and every day. That's what those guys strive to do. So that's what I always strive to do in the things I attempt as well, because you just think about, like I said, how precious life is as well. And just guys who just gave it all and were such lights in the world, honestly, that it was such a hard thing to have them not here anymore with this Utah program. So today is always a somber day, as it's going to be for years going forward as well. But it just is one of those things as well, that all the prayers out to his family as well. And we miss both those guys deeply.
Definitely. And I think, I had the unique experience. I don't know if there's a better way to describe it, of covering both his and Ty's passing here on the podcast. And we were talking before the show that Sunday morning I woke up and the first thought, almost like instinct, to just taking over, was just don't check your phone. Because we were talking about where we were when we found out the news, and both times I'd woken up to multiple texts on my phone, and maybe it's a bad habit. I like to sleep in on Sundays. I'm not going to hide that from anybody. You and I spend a lot of time out Friday nights. I was out Thursday night, and Saturdays are always late, long days, especially when you're covering Utah football. But, that's a feeling that I'll never forget. And Ty was one thing, because Ty was special, but I never got to meet Ty.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron was one that I watched his recruiting from afar, knew how dedicated he was to being a Ute. And the bigger thing was seeing him at practice and wanting to get to talk to him and wanting to get to know him and wanting to connect with him, and just having that removed. And you talk about, people say live every day like it's your last. You just can't do that in life. But what
Exactly.
you can do is use those memories and those experiences to do like the university has kind of embraced, and 22% better every single day. And I think the trajectory of this program, of this school, this institution, will be forever, altered because of it. But I think there's some true blessings and silver linings that have come, and you never want to see someone lose their life over that kind of thing. But I appreciate so much what the Lowe family and the Jordan family have done, to embrace the university, and their appreciation for both the outreach of the fans, but also the institution and everything like that. And it's just, you said the word somber. I think that's a perfect encapsulation of just the feeling and the mood, because you miss those players, and it reminds me of, teammates I've lost and things of that nature too. So it's one of those days that you don't always, you don't love necessarily, but there's a purpose to it.
Yeah, and just things like the moment of loudness have become such a special tradition for Rice Eccles. And those guys, they may be gone, but they will never be forgotten. So it is great to see the steps the university is taking, embracing those families as well. You mentioned the Jordan and Lowe family. So just something to always remember, that getting that 22% better every day moving forward, taking that mindset, as well as remembering what those guys stood for and trying to set an example as well that would make those guys proud or happy in a way as well. So always remember what those guys did for this program as well. And just moving forward for this Utah team, they'll always be a part of the family, which is something really cool. And shifting off this news, which is never easy to do, but shifting onto the field, Utah got the news today was broken that Brant Kuithe will be missing the remainder of the regular season. He's out for the season. It's a lower leg injury. Coach Whittingham didn't want to specify to us, but yeah, just didn't want to give us much in regards to what it is. But
It
just
initially said it's a leg injury and then
yeah,
said lower leg. Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Thank you.
But
Very informative.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to focus on later how Utah goes about replacing him. But just looking at what Utah loses in Kuithe, I mean, you lose arguably your best weapon in this offense in general. Honestly, I know Tavion Thomas is incredible, but you just look at what Kuithe does on the outside too. Kuithe was the best player for this Utah team against Florida earlier in the season. You just look at the mismatch that he is at tight end, his ability to get open on the outside, and he draws the defenses in. I think a lot of teams, maybe they circle Dalton first. I think a lot of them circle Kincaid first, honestly, when they're trying to game plan for Utah's weapons on the outside. So you lose someone that is reliable, has strong hands. And I mean, Kuithe was tracking towards his best season as a Ute yet. I mean, I really think he was heading for more than 600 yards. I think that was his previous pass was in that 600, but 700, 800, I think was definitely on the table. And he was only going to continue to get better and put that out there. So feel Utah lost one of their best players on offense, lost a guy who's reliable, capable of getting open, stretching the field, phenomenal hands, a much improved blocker as well. I felt like every year he got better at blocking too. So just someone who understood what it took to be a tight end for this team as well. And I will talk about this in another day, but I feel bad for how it could affect his draft stock as well, depending on how teams view that injury going forward. But Brian, what are the Utes losing in Kuithe?
Production, I think, is the biggest thing, and you made a good point with all that stuff. JT is that he's probably he. It's hard because I think
It's a
Utah
lot.
fans are dying for that 1,000-yard receiver, right? Like
Mhm.
the offense has always been proficient. It's just what can you hang your hat on? And I think that was he was kind of the prince who was promised in that regard this year, or maybe it was going to be Devon Vele. It just kind of depends. This is not a program where they're about putting stats together for guys or trying to put together campaigns or running an offense based off of that kind of thing. So there was no guarantee that he was going to get to that or any other sort of benchmark. But I think you talk about, it's interesting. I did an interview with Thomas Yasmin, who's more than likely going to step into that role in the spring, and he talked about his biggest goal is consistency. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the performance of Dalton and Brant in their roles. And they're incredibly consistent and they're incredibly good at what they do. And so I think you just miss a lot of that. And we were talking about our review of the film and just, I kind of saw the same things. There's just a lot of inconsistent play from a lot of different positions out there, especially offensively.
Mhm.
And so you can see what you lose with that. However, it is a next man up mentality. The other thing too is I feel like sometimes when offenses get a little too vanilla, a little too plain, that consistency gets hard because you don't feel challenged. And so you start to check out mentally. And so I think that's going to help the offense in some respects because Utah is going to have to diversify personnel. You're not going to be able to just roll with 12 every single series and every single down. So the bigger thing is just you're hurt for Brant. I mean, that's the
Yes.
biggest thing. So you wish him the best. Hope he gets to that rehab quickly. Hope he's able to maybe get a combine invite and showcase that, like it's healing. I think, Julian Blackmon's a great example of how your play
Yes.
can also, dictate that you're still a viable option. And yeah, boy, man, it's real hard to doubt a Utah player coming out these days, especially with the way that Devin Lloyd's playing in the NFL,
Oh my gosh,
Julian
he's been incredible.
Blackmon, Jalen Johnson. I mean, there's just a list of dudes that are balling out. So you have to think that he's going to at least get an opportunity. Just it'll be different than the one that he was probably going to get if he was going to finish the season.
Julian is a great example because that is
Mm,
someone in a redraft 10 out of 10 times goes higher, maybe even in the first round. I'd have to really
yeah,
look at that draft to see, but I do believe he'd go there as well. So all the best of
yeah.
luck to Brant in his rehab as well. It's going to be a guy this Utah offense desperately misses. So who does the burden fall onto now? Or is it burdens, as multiple people will try to take it on, fall to now for this Utah offense? We're going to talk about the specific players who will have to step up in just a second. But first, want to tell you guys about Upside. From cringing at the pump to getting an eye-popping check at your favorite restaurant, Inflation is hitting us all where it hurts, and it really hurts. That's why I started using Upside. Upside is a incredible app for anyone who buys gas, groceries, or dines out. With every purchase, I'm earning cash back thanks to Upside. Guys, Upside is super easy to download and use as well, so you can get on there, start earning cash back today. Make sure you guys get Upside. To get started, download the free Upside app and use my promo code LOCKED and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Next, claim an offer from whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the businesses and pay as usual with credit or debit card and get paid. Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on Apple Store. So download the free Upside app and use promo code LOCKED to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code LOCKED. So make sure you guys head over to your app store and look in at Upside today. Brian, jumping back in here. Look, Brant Kuithe was on the season. He was Utah's second leader in receiving yardage up to this point. Not surprising. It's been the tight ends. That's another thing. Of course, Utah now loses in this is, we were saying, obviously Utah has the best we were arguing Utah has the best tight end duo in the pack in the nation. Honestly, you can't argue that anymore now with Brant gone. So you lose someone there, but Dalton Kincaid leads his team in yards, but Kuithe was second. You're losing the guy who had 19 receptions for 206 yards. He had 3 touchdowns on the year and was averaging 10.8 yards per catch as well. And even showed off that ability, as we said, just to come up crucial on a guy that Cam trusted. So when you lose him, you look at, okay, so who's going to step up? And the biggest names that come to mind to me is Thomas Yasmin, as well as I'm excited to see more Logan Kendall. And I'll say this about Logan Kendall. To me, Logan Kendall can do a lot of things that Cole Fotheringham did last year in terms of, I think Logan Kendall is an outstanding blocker. I just watch him out there. The very first play of the Arizona State game, he went out there and got embodied into the pancake platoon, Brian. I don't know if you saw that as well, but he laid the wood right away, getting a pancake there. So I also, how about Yasmin? Oh my gosh, what a catch and run, just throwing dudes out of the way. I was watching that game. I woke my mom up because I yelled so loudly after Yasmin's just throwing dudes all over the place. Just something fun to watch him get to work. So first focusing just on the tight end aspect of this, because I do think receivers are going to be able to pick up the slack as well without Kuithe, but I do think Utah still has a really good tight end room. And by the end of the season, we could still be saying they have the best tight end room in the Pac-12, even without Brant Kuithe.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot of good talent in that room that just needs some time to develop. And I think that's the biggest thing that's limited Thomas Yasmin from really exploding onto the scene is he just hasn't gotten the reps. He's not getting the reps in practice. He's not getting the reps in the game because you're playing behind Brant Kuithe and Dalton Kincaid. And before that, you were playing behind Cole Fotheringham. And those are some of the best tight ends that have been through this conference. Cole Fotheringham is playing for the Raiders. He was the forgotten guy in that room last year, and he's out there getting snaps for an NFL team. So he must have been pretty good. And the bigger thing is just the consistency that you get from Dalton and Brant in the run game, their ability to be that inline tight end, inline move, however you want to call it, right? Utah calls it inline. I call it a move. I think moves the more broad terminology. And Thomas, you notice he played a lot of the U-back position where he was 1-by-1 with Dalton. And I think that's because Dalton is just the more experienced player, the better blocker. And so he'll have another week where he'll get all the reps to develop. But I think the interesting part that you mentioned with Kendall is the biggest thing with him has just been consistency as well, right? New system, new plays, a lot of new stuff to learn, a lot of new technique and that kind of thing that you maybe aren't used to because you've just been so physical at your previous stop and you were able to just manhandle people before. And I talked to the Rhino in the fall and excuse me, he is the kind of guy where he just wants to be physical and dominate, and you love that kind of mentality, especially out of a guy who can be that hybrid fullback tight end type character. But there's just plenty of talent in this room. But I think the bigger thing is another thing to point out. Thomas Yasmin 6'5", 250, and he's also a 4'5", 40 guy. So it's all there. If you're looking for the best athlete in the tight end room, it was Thomas Yasmin. That's who it's been for a long, long time. And so now he's going to get some reps and you can see what he did playing with confidence in that Arizona State game. Now all of a sudden you feel better when you're going into practice, because you put it out on tape.
I did that in game.
Yeah. And it doesn't it's like you and me doing reps here on Locked On Utes, right? The first few months, it's just whoa, boy, that's tough, And then by the time you get 6 months in, you're just rolling these things out in your sleep, which people are listening yep, I remember that episode when Brian fell asleep. But that's just the reality of
No way. I
You
just
never
want
know
to,
what happens on
did
Locked
you
On Utes,
actually? Yeah,
man.
I just wanted to check
Yeah,
that.
there have been a few nights where it was a little late, where I was just like,
Yeah,
but that was before YouTube, thankfully.
I figured. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the bigger question to me.
Okay. What is?
I think you may be a little too young for this, the Ewing
Okay.
theory, where like a team can actually be better without its best player. I think the bigger
That's a real
question to
thing.
me is what does Utah do in terms of personnel to replace
Mhm.
the production? We know they're going to do a lot of 12 personnel, which is one back, two tight ends. But what do they do to replace Kuithe when he's split out and things like that? Do they maybe bring in a little bit more of the actual four wide receivers when they run their four wide receiver sets? Do they modify things a little bit more to get Cam outside of just looking at the tight ends all the time? That's the more intriguing question to me.
I look back, you brought that up, and this is what I thought of right away. I look back, I'm a Vikings fan. I thought back to Dalvin Cook and Sam Bradford. I almost blanked on his name, but he had a pretty forgettable NFL career, so you can don't blame me too hard for
Which
that.
is
But
surprising because
yeah,
everybody who talks about him says
oh
he was
my
a really
gosh.
great quarterback. But
Well,
like,
Oklahoma lit it up, yeah.
yeah, incredible.
But
Anyways,
yeah, the Vikings,
sidetracked.
yeah, the Viking season that year, Case Keenum came in, and then you get Latavius Murray as well as some of the other guys, and that offense just improved because those other guys were forced into positions where they had to be relied upon more and really had to step up, and that's what they were able to do in that situation. I think for this Utah team, you mentioned it, that's what a lot of players are going to have the opportunity to do now as well, and I'm really excited to see guys like Money Parks get more opportunities because of this, because I think we will see more 3 receiver sets from the Utes, and that was something Coach Whittingham has talked about before, how 90% of the time it's Solomon Enos and just Devon Vele out there. Well, now your 4 best pass catchers doesn't include, and look, Yasmin might grow into that, but right now I do trust Money Parks, I think, up to this point to be able to make some more plays in the passing game. So now your best 4 pass catchers includes 3 wide receivers instead of 2 receivers, 2 tight ends. So we will see more of those receivers. I'm excited to see guys like Jalen Dixon, see if they can do a little bit more, because he's been so electric in the sweep game as well and just flying around out there using his wheels. Love to see him get a couple opportunities deep, as he's been able to do so in the past as well. And Makai Cope is a guy that, look, I know he just made the one highlight catch in spring ball as well, but I just think he's the kind of guy that give him an opportunities in some game. And he got a couple snaps versus Arizona State as well, that I think he's going to be able to haul in some balls as well. So I really think we're going to see Money Parks have some pretty big catches coming up. And even he had one catch. It was a massive one, the 19-yarder. He was 3rd and long. He ran that comeback route perfectly and made a great catch on the ball. And those are the kind of things, as you talked about as well with Thomas Yasmin, those give him the confidence moving forward as well.
Yeah, well, and I like the way that Yasmin did it, right? Big time
Yes.
yak. And Utah's really
Hit.
lacked for explosive plays this season, which is kind of bizarre because
Well, that
it's
was all the
been
hype coming in too.
yeah, and that really was kind of been their bread and butter. And I mean, for example, against
Even explosive runs haven't been there.
yeah,
I mean,
that's the
off the top of my
thing.
head, I can't think of the longest rushing touchdown of the season. I don't think it's more than 15 yards.
Hmm. Um, and I haven't done enough research into it yet, but like, the areas where I think you might miss Brant. So I think we saw it a little bit on Saturday, right? The red zone where he is so
Yes.
dominant both as a blocker, but also as a weapon. And I think that's an area where you're going to have to get a little bit more creative, right? But also, if you're able to stretch the field with Money Parks, that's a good thing. I agree with you 100% on that one. Sidney Bannister is another one that like could be an interesting
A lot of
prospect.
potential.
Yeah, and Munir McClain, there are guys on this roster that just aren't as reliable as Brant. Now you're going to have to use them, and we've seen in years past, Utah is just such a disciplined program, right? Where you have to buy in, you have to do this, you have to do that. But as you give guys an opportunity, they kind of like explode, there's a lot of guys on this roster that we could talk about. I think in terms of wide receiver ish positions that I think could really provide some spark to this offense. And it's kind of weird to say, I'm looking at the stats right now, just in cumulative, they had 465 total yards against Arizona State and scored 34 points. You kind of think to yourself, like, spark, what spark? Well, 66% from completion is not like elite in my opinion. They had
Mhm.
13.7 yards per completion. I expect that number to be closer to 15, 16, sometimes even 18. And the bigger, more interesting number to me that's starting to emerge is the run pass ratio, where we're 45 to 29. So you're almost you're not almost, you're 16 plays more run plays. So you're severely more heavy in the run game. And look, it was fine because Utah got away, got a big lead and just held on to it. But 4.6 yards per rush, that's plenty of good rushing yards. But like you said, they're just not exploding to it. And so if you can find ways to open up the lid of that offense a little bit, I think that's a good thing. And it's just, you just don't want to do it by losing Brant Kuithe, right?
That's what does suck and makes it so difficult to handle. I think the last name we'll throw in here as well, and I mentioned a couple of these guys in passing a little bit. We talked about more of the depth guys, but the last 2 weeks, Devon Vele, career high in touchdowns, and this last week had the season high in reception as well. I think he's a guy who's just going to continue to grow. We heard all year coming in, he was Cam's guy during training camp. But then what happened? You got back in that game action. We were just talking about how different games are from practices. It basically couldn't be more different, honestly, in terms of what happened. So when stuff hits the fan, basically what happens from there then is you go back to trusting your guys, and his guys have been Dalton Kincaid and Brant Kuithe, and you can see he's starting to build those trust with those other guys a little bit as well. And I really feel like Devon now is in a position where, look, Dalton may lead this team in yards. I feel like we are going to see I feel even stronger now than I did going into this. After the first few games, I wasn't sure if we were going to see Devon really break out like we expected him to, but I really think now, as him and Cam kind of continue to grow their connection and that trust, I think Devon is going to end up having a really big season now as well.
Yeah, I think Devon's a guy that you look at. I think Jalen Dixon's a guy that you look at. I think Taekwon Gilmore,
Oh, yes.
he's played in 3 games already this year, so
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see as he.
He's
And
got good
I
speed too.
yeah, and I can't remember if he's got a red shirt available or not. That's one of those things that I've not done a good job
Fun fact, by the way, Coach Whittingham did bring that up, that Kuithe does have a red shirt. Look, he almost flirted with the NFL. I
Yeah.
don't think he's going to use it, but just want to say, if he doesn't get the feedback he wants to, there is at least a less than 1% chance, probably, but there's the slimmest of chances he can still decide to come back to Utah.
And look, he's still probably like 5 years younger than Brant Kuithe was when he got
Yeah.
drafted by the Eagles. So, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Maybe
Yeah.
you sit out a year and come back and be a punt
Mhm.
returner and try your hand at quarterback. It doesn't matter. Like, I think Brant has put enough, and we talked about this. I think he's put enough out there in terms of his ability to be in the slot where he's a Thielen, Cooper Kupp, bigger target, but he's still got that versatility, and he's done it against a team that has legit athletes in Florida. So I think,
Yes.
as in terms of a prospect, I think it's still there. And Utah is becoming this institution where it doesn't really matter. We talked about
To talk
Julian
about
Blackman
him. Jalen
redraft.
Johnson.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson. And everybody kind of was like, Jacksonville, Devin Lloyd, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden it's just like, whoa, Devin
Yeah.
Lloyd, defensive player of the year or defensive rookie of the year. Maybe what a great pick. Surprised he can drop into coverage. It's just like, do people not watch tape on this guy?
I
Like
mean,
I don't,
seriously.
I don't know.
You
So
saw how much
anyways,
Utah missed him in the Florida game.
oh, dude, and I don't think it's funny. I wrote an article about Brant Kuithe in the spring, and I had one that I'd been working on for Devin Lloyd that never got around to. Eventually, I'm sure I'll post it, but just he's so undefinable in terms of his impact on a game. You never know where it's going to come from. Is it going to become a
Yes.
pass? Is it an interception? What
Gosh.
is it? Right. So it's just, we talk about all this stuff like there's a guy out there that's going to step up and be that guy for the offense. You know what I mean? And I think, I've seen some things out of Cam that I'm just like, I'm kind of wondering, like, are you pressing too much? How much, like, you're relying so much on the tight ends that I think kind of breaking him out of that shell and bigger than that, like breaking Andy Ludwig, who is a just absolutely brilliant offensive coordinator, out of his just 12 personnel. These are the plays that we run, and we only run these 16 plays. I think that's a great thing for this Utah offense because they really do need to be a little bit more, I don't want to say creative, but diverse is what I want to be.
Diverse is a good point, and it's actually a perfect segue into us talking about this Arizona State game. So you and I went back and watched the tape from this one, and one thing I really stressed in an article I have coming out for UteZone here pretty soon is I thought this was Cam's best game of the season so far. I felt like personally he did a really good job of distributing the ball around to different playmakers. One thing I also loved is that he just didn't lock onto reads. That was something we saw a couple times versus Southern Utah that I didn't like, is he would lock onto a read. I saw multiple times where he used his eyes to manipulate the defense, whether that's looking to the left. I think it was a key 3rd and 3 on the 3rd drive of the game. He looked to the right first. He wanted to go to Devon to that ball all the way, but he wanted to get that linebacker to move over just those couple steps, and then he comes back over and gets it to Devon for the first time. So I like that he was getting the receivers involved. I thought he did a good job hanging in the pocket, did a better job in his dropbacks as well. So I personally was pleased with the developments I saw from Cam Rising.
Yeah, and I think some of it is Cam hears the chatter, right?
Mhm. Oh, every player does. They can
Yeah.
tell you they don't. Everyone hears it. It's impossible to avoid. Whether they don't check social media or not, someone's going to text them, whether it's a friend or family member, and they hear it. So don't believe players where they tell you that they don't listen to the noise. They know.
Yeah, and even if you don't hear it, you kind of know it, right? Like there's this weird sixth sense where you just kind of like you can kind of tell that like, man, I have been doing this too much, or I have been doing that too much, and you can kind of see it. Like you can kind of see it in the first drive. He was really amped up, really trying to overcome that slow start, and
They still had to punt.
yeah, and it's just so you know that he's really pressing hard because I think he knows. For one, he knows how good he is, but for two, he knows how important this season is both to himself as a player individually and to his teammates. And if there's one thing I know about Cam Rising, it's that he does not want to let his teammates down, right? And so he's going to work and keep grinding and pushing himself to be the best that he possibly can. I think he needs a little bit of an assist from Andy Ludwig for that, though, right? And I think some of it is game planning. And I think you saw, I don't want to focus on drops too much, but you saw a couple of his wide receivers drop some really easy balls too, and then that alone might have bumped his completion percentage up to 70-something% or whatever it is that, this chair jockey is demanding over here. But I think the bigger thing about it is just he is I think a secret perfectionist. You know what I mean?
My gosh, yes. No, I 100% agree with that. You think it's a secret? I think he is a
Well, I mean, like you wouldn't think it kind of like based on his demeanor, I guess is really what I'm trying to say.
If you see if you see a photo of him, I think you get the perception totally wrong because he is a guy who cares so much about his teammates, as you just talked about as well, wants to go out there, win, one of the hardest workers in the room. And when you have someone who kind of just stereotypically has hair like that, you kind of just don't associate them with that. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's exactly what the stereotype is, which I think when people look at, that's one of the reasons Cam Rising became a meme at first to a lot of people, because you're like, this is the guy lighting up the Pac-12, and then you watch him play and you're like, you're right, it is.
Well, and there's a lot of those kinds of things, right? That he kind of does, like we all, the big giant helmet meme that kind of came out of camp, and he's got that look on his face. And he's like, "Hey, like I'm so happy to be throwing a football." And there's a lot of that kind of stuff with him. But like, I think the bigger thing is that he does not want to let his teammates down. You know what I mean? And I think that's more than just, it's more just than offense or defense or everything like that. It's guys individually that, like, guys like Devon Vele that he knows he wants to get the ball to. And so I just, I think, and we've talked about this before too, like he's still not played a ton of football, like he's played one season. Yeah. How many NFL quarterbacks do you see that only played one season?
I mean, it's not a lot. I mean,
I
guess Joe Burrow jumped in my head right away, but that was such a rare aberration where the dude was in college for how many years first anyway.
Exactly. Right. So he got a ton of reps from a ton of different people in a
ton
of
even
different
played
scenarios.
That year before at LSU. He was just on.
He did. So he played it towards the end of the year at LSU, kind of played out of it. Right. But nobody expected anything big from him. And so I think
that UCF hit.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think
We're getting real technical here. Yeah.
Now
we'll be on a dead point, by the way, and then we'll just get so far off track.
I know.
Just pulls the lever and just switches it on us. That's why it's always chaos when we do this together.
It's even worse on a game broadcast, but like in the best kind of way. But exactly. I think the overall point, like Utah's, we get so down on these games and we want to nitpick things. And I'm looking at the scores, like it was 34-13, and it probably should have been 40-something to 13.
Exactly.
Or not even 13. Should have been 6.
Mm-hmm.
So like, am I really complaining when you knock a pack, like not just a Pac-12 team, but a Power 5 team to the dirt like that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I'll stick with the nitpicking. But first, I do want to say this. One of my other takeaways from watching the tape was I was just so impressed with Utah's defensive line. I saw Connor O'Toole in zone read situations make plays that he simply just didn't make in week 1. So it was nice, encouraging to see him make that. And look, it's a different kind of quarterback bringing him down as well, but still a step in the right direction. When you're looking at guys like, for me, Sione Vaki, I think, is a guy who's done a good job, or excuse me, that's Sione Vaki. Bai Mahi has done a phenomenal job at defensive tackle. Simote Peppa has done a phenomenal job. I thought Junior Tafuna, just the job they did stifling the ASU rushing attack was absolutely outstanding. I just loved what I saw from Utah's defensive tackles. Being able to take on 2 offensive linemen at one time is such a crucial aspect. So I loved what I saw from them. Speaking of nitpicking, some of the run blocking things, as well as running backs missing holes, that's just something I want to see cleaned up getting forward, especially because against better defensive lines, you're not always going to have those opportunities. But at the end of the day, you mentioned Utah still rushed for over 200 yards in the game, still had a rushing touchdown. Shout out to Jaquindon Jackson, by the way. So fun to see him on the field. And that's a guy I've mentioned before. I just wanted to see more Jaquindon. As soon as he got out there versus Southern Utah, you just saw them that first run. He's just such an electric player who makes things happen. And all the credit in the world to him as well for being a team first guy and being willing. There are so many quarterbacks who'd be like, I am not playing running back. So all the credit in the world for him being like, coach, get me out of there. And I think he was on kickoff the week before too. Like he's just a guy who wants to be out
Punt
there.
return as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Which I just appreciate about him so much. But Brian, what else stood out to you from the tape?
Cole Bishop, obviously.
Oh my gosh.
And it's
Honestly,
not.
should have given a segment to him. But
Well, it's hard because like you get zoomed in on certain things and you get really impressed with the effort of the defensive line. You know, I thought, and it was fun because I got to do a playback room where we were watching with people and you know, folks were asking like, why don't they have Van Fillinger in on pass rush? And I think it was the very play that like Connor O'Toole, you know, rushed around the outside and just burned his tackle. Like Jonah Ellis, like there's just an absolute.
hey, how about Gabe Reed rushing from the inside?
Yeah,
I thought
Gabe
that was
Reed
a
was
phenomenal touch.
And
That's
a
something
lot
of
of
NFL teams will do too, is they'll put some of their best pass rushers on the inside. Guards
Yep.
are traditionally not as good as pass blocking. Thought that was a great move by Utah.
It was, and I think that's one of those things where you're going to see that based on matchups, right? Like it's a good matchup for Gabe on that one, right? You know, last week it was Devin Kafusi and Simone Peppa that were doing a really great job. You know, we saw some in Tennessee Putu Out against Arizona State. You just saw there's just an absolute wealth of talent there, and you're trying to find ways to get everybody reps and get everybody in the game, and also try to get guys developed. So I think that's the most impressive thing about Cole Bishop for me is week to week. He just gets so much more impressive, both in terms of just causing havoc, you know, in whatever role he's doing, whether it's pass defense, you know, his hit on Emory Jones, I thought was textbook of like, hey, that's how you tackle a quarterback.
Yes, not a
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
And
And for once, you know, Pac-12 refs got it right.
credit to them.
Congratulations to them. Like I'm the first one to be critical of them. We should give them a hallelujah. You know,
there's a lot of
praise the
officials that
Lombardi.
just
You did a
their
great
call.
job.
A lot of them would have. So credit to them. You're
Yeah.
right.
So that was the bigger thing, and then just the overall defense as a whole. RJ Hubert doing a great job on the knock loose,
Awesome.
and you know that was great.
Clark's interception was phenomenal.
Yeah, and I feel bad for him because if the guy hadn't had his hand halfway down his face mask, he's probably in the end zone. You know,
Exactly.
so it really hard. Again, another game, great job by the defense. You're starting to see, and you have to wonder as Utah gets more confident in that defense, and as that defense gets more confident in itself, do they start to take the training wheels off a little bit on the offense? And really, I think you're getting into that part of the schedule where you've got to start being explosive early on as an offense, right? Because Oregon State's going to be tough. UCLA's obviously coming into their own, and then it's the big one. Yeah, you know, night game at home at Rice Eccles against the Trojans.
Yeah, it's a monumental slate the Utes have coming up, and you mentioned it. But still, Utah's been rolling. The defense has been outstanding the last few weeks. The offense still been able to put up over 30 points in 3 weeks in a row. Has been something exciting to watch as well. So, Brian, what are your expectations, and how do you think this Saturday's game against the Beavers is going to play out?
I think it's going to be a slugfest. You know, this is a physical Beavers football team. They're coming off a really tight game with USC, but I think that's the unique part about it for Utah is that they know what it's like to be Oregon State, where you're trying to establish yourself, and it's really hard to come off of those. I don't want to say big losses, but those tough losses, right? Where it's just like you're so close and you can almost taste it. So is Oregon State going to re-engage? Now they're very, very talented up front on offense, right? Some real talented earth movers. We saw Utah's defensive line really struggle against them last year. You have to believe that Junior Tafuna and his gang of feisty men are going to go, you know, full bore into this week and try and kind of get a little revenge back. But I think I have a hard time, you know, like not seeing Utah win this one by 2 scores. You know,
I agree. Well, especially, I mean, Oregon State was 1-5 on the road last year. Like, and it's tough to go into Rice Eccles. And what do we see this now? Obviously, Oregon State is a big step up from San Diego State, but Utah, we saw how they avenged their loss versus San Diego State. I expect this team to come in from the same mindset this game as well. And it's something we're going to talk about more in the week as well. But I feel the same way, Brian.
Yeah, and I don't want to put, the cart before the horse, but I think even Vegas has them as a pretty significant favorite,
Exactly.
if I'm not missing. And I'm not usually the
Vegas is
best at.
smart too. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. Like I was totally off on the line a couple weeks ago. I was so, oh, Michigan State is going to do well against
Mhm.
Washington, and how right was Vegas about that one? So Vegas knows
There's a
what's going.
reason that those casinos are bigger than anything that you and I have ever done,
Yeah,
So like they got to know something that's going on there. But I think this is it's a bigger game. I think in terms of who you are in terms of defining yourself as a team for Oregon State than it is for Utah. For Utah, it is the next rung on the schedule, and I don't worry about this team when it's just another day at the office.
I don't worry about them as well. I feel like they're going to do well, and we're going to be talking about that all week long on Locked On Utes. But Brian, you did a really good job breaking down and kind of talking about a couple things from this game. If people want to get a little bit of more of those breakdowns, where can they go?
Uh, where can't they go? I'm all over the place these days. I try to throw some content out on Twitter. You can always check UteZone, Utah Blogcast, all that kind of stuff. Where I'm kind of here bits and pieces. Just trying to help out here on Locked On Utes. So I'm kind of a little homeless these days. It just is moving and all sorts of other things have been happening. But best is always find me on Twitter at BrownBearSLC.
Make sure you guys head over there, give him a follow. Give us a follow as well I'm at JT Wistrcill, as well as Locked On Utes. Love to hear from you guys in the comments as well. Appreciate you guys for always liking and subscribing. And we appreciate you as always making us your first listen every day. But if you're in the market for a second listen every day, head over to the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. Host Spencer McLaughlin will take you around the conference in under 30 minutes. Tons of great guests on there, reacting from Saturday's action, as well as previewing the games this upcoming Saturday and what figures to be another fun and exciting Saturday. So appreciate Bryan Brown as always for joining us. That's it for today's Locked On Utes, but we'll see you tomorrow.